Hey guys, it's Navonod. First thing I want to say is just I want to apologize for my lack of poker content this week, or at least this weekend. I've been working with a couple of paying students, and when I do work with paying clientele, I obviously try to focus my attention on them. Not like because I'm making a ton of money, I'm certainly not getting rich off of it, but just because, I feel like if they're paying me for my time, I need to give my time to them. And also, I've got just a little bit of poker content writer's block. Maybe I shot a little bit too much of my, emptied a little bit too much of my clip on the first few videos in the Silver Bullet series. But anyway, so can we make money betting MMA fights? Big question. And I think the answer is absolutely yes. At least right now we can. Could that change? Yeah, I think it will change. But at current moment, in present, I think we have a big opportunity to invest money in a rational way and get a good overlay and a good return on investment from sports betting. And this video is going to be really about why I think that's the case and how we should go about trying to find these edges and invest our money wisely in fighting. Where does the line come from? How does that differ from a rational, objective analysis of a fight? And how can we exploit the difference between the money line and what a rational analysis would tell us? First thing we have to understand when we're trying to figure this out is where the money line comes from. So the bookies that are offering to take action, small time bookies or big internet books, the way that they work, they try to balance their books out. In general, most bookies try to balance their books out so that they have the same amount of money bet on each side of the line, and that way they can just kick back and collect a nice variance-free income. So if they, have 10% juice, if their vigorish is, if the vig is 10%, then if they can get it to be, say, $10,000 on fighter A, $10,000 on fighter B, they've got their line balanced, then they just kick back and make a nice, easy 10%. But if a lot of money comes in on fighter A and little money comes in on fighter B, then they've really got their nose open, and they're in such a way that they could go upside down and lose a lot of money in the fight. So most bookies want to try to avoid that, and the way they try to avoid that is to incentivize people to bet on the underdog, or incentivize people to bet on the fighter that has less action on them. And they do that in the form of offering money odds, and they want to disincentivize people from putting additional money in on the favorite, and they do that by charging a premium, and they do that by causing you to lay money if you're going to bet on the favorite. So this is how the line works. So is the line a reflection of what is likely to actually happen? Well, in theory, I mean, one would hope, but the bookies, wow. Okay, I guess one would hope doesn't really hold, but one would think. And if we assumed that the people making wagers were rational thinking people, then yeah, you would expect that. But the reality is there are factors that weigh heavily on public opinion and cause money to be added to the prize pool irrationally that don't have anything to do with who's more likely to win the fight, or have very little to do with who's actually going to win the fight. It's an overemphasis. So the first thing is hype. Man, if there's a guy that is really good at running his mouth, there's a pretty good chance betting on his opponent will give you an overlay situation, especially if he is the favorite. Hype does cause people to make wagers, but hype alone does not make one fighter more likely to beat another fighter in real life. Streaks. I think all gamblers, a lot of gamblers, and I mean not investors, not professionals, not poker players, but gamblers, people that just are kind of action junkies, have this fallacy where they believe in momentum and they believe in streaks in a way that is not rational. Is there such a thing as momentum among fighters? Well, it's probably helpful to be confident to a point, and so that can help. But there's definitely an overemphasis on this. People that are on big winning streaks tend to have more money wagered on them than they probably ought to based on the line, because of this fallacy where people believe in streaks, and this fallacy that momentum is this huge real life thing. where it's probably not that big of a deal in reality, and it's questionable whether momentum actually even is a thing. Overemphasis of best performance and overemphasis of most recent performance. Now, this is very, very much the case that this would be a creator of dead money, a creator of overlay, when the most recent performance is also the very best performance. When a fighter has had their most recent performance has been their best performance, and it was a fantastic performance, and they're riding this trash talking hype train, and they're on a massive streak, then there's a real good chance that there's too much money wagered on that fighter. And if there's too much money wagered on that fighter, you can make money in the long run by betting on the opponent. Now, there is juice involved. There's this 10% vigorish that you have to overcome. And I think in most sports, it's gotten to the point where the people making predictions and the bookmakers and the people that open the lines, they have the game down so much, so well, to such a degree that that 10% vigorish makes it pretty difficult to beat sports betting in the long run. But I don't think that's the case yet in MMA. It's still kind of in its, if not infancy, then adolescence. Big one here at the bottom right. Unrealistic assumptions of linear hierarchies and fight matchups. What is a linear hierarchy? Well, a linear hierarchy would be something like pocket aces are greater than pocket kings. Pocket kings are greater than pocket queens. Therefore, pocket aces are greater than pocket queens. And that would certainly be the case in aces versus kings versus queens. But if we look at three other starting hands from a poker perspective, and this is just assuming we get all the money in pre-flop, we run the hands hot and cold. Ace-king offsuit is a favorite against Jack-10 suited. Jack-10 suited is a favorite against pocket twos. And therefore you might assume that ace-king offsuit is a big favorite against pocket twos, but you would be wrong. Pocket twos are a kind of, well, they're a small favorite, but they're a favorite against ace-king offsuit, hot and cold. So that is a non-linear hierarchy. It's kind of a rock, paper, scissors situation where, you know, you could say, okay, rock is greater than scissors, scissors is greater than paper, therefore paper must be an underdog to rock. But we know that's not the case, right? So we have to look for these unrealistic assumptions of linear hierarchies when they don't apply and take advantage of them. Okay, so a rational analysis. People that are analyzing fights in an objective manner, they look at things like the records of each fighter, and not just like 10-0 versus 5-1, but also who they've fought. They look at the stylistic matchups of the fighters that they have fought, who they've won to, who they've won against, who they've lost to, and what were the reasons that those things happened. They look at fluke potential, which does not enter in at all in the betting line. I mean, there's always the guy that's really, really good on the ground. He's got a superb takedown game, and he's never been hit. Well, we don't know what happens if that guy does get hit. That might be an X factor, that if we have a precision striker against a guy who's a just dominant force on the ground with his jiu-jitsu and submission skills, and he's really good at taking the fight to the ground, but we've never seen him hit. Now we've got a precision striker. We've seen this guy beat every striker that he's fought, but we've never seen his chin tested, and now we've got a guy who might be able to hit him on the come. That's an X factor, and that's going to give us some extra incentive logically, not a lot, but a little extra incentive logically to bet the fighter who has the potential to find this kind of anomaly or anomalous victory. And people ignore that. They don't think about the chances of something like that happening. An example I'll cite that I actually made money on: Anderson Silva against Weidman in the first fight. Okay, Anderson Silva was a monster, overhyped favorite. He was probably the best fighter on the planet at that time, but he was very arrogant, and it was almost like he was trying to play this game where he was seeing how close he could get to your fist without actually getting knocked out. I knew that eventually that was going to come to an end, and I saw the line and how just crazy favorite he was, and how much money there was to win on Weidman, and I placed my wager on Weidman, and exactly what I thought would happen at some point happened. Anderson Silva was fighting with his hands down, trying to poke his head around and see how close he could get to being hit without actually being hit, and he got knocked out. Kind of interestingly, the last time I lost on a card, I lost on the rematch. I actually, once the line renormalized and they were about even money, I actually did bet Anderson Silva to win in the rematch, but we saw what happened. He broke his own leg throwing a kick, which is kind of another X Factor anomaly type thing. What these anomalies and X Factors tend to do is they tend to make it more likely that the underdog actually wins than people think, or that public opinion or the money line will show. Also, when we're doing a realistic analysis, we have to pay the most attention to the matchup. Fighters have kind of these structured archetypes, right? There are fighters that are just jack of all trades, master of none, that are just super well rounded, and their game plan is just to find whatever their opponent's weakness is and get the fight there. Make sure the fight takes place there. There are fighters that are very, very good on the ground, not that good standing up, and they play kind of this ground and pound game because they're just really good wrestlers. Their submission game's not maybe all that great, but they focus on takedowns and passing the guard or sitting in the guard and doing damage and delivering punishment from inside the guard. That's one archetype. There's an archetype of a pure grappler, like a Jacare or a Damian Maia. There's an archetype that's moreover dead, but there's still a couple fighters that are more or less pure stand-up fighters with very little takedown defense or wrestling or jiu-jitsu. I don't know, you might call like Wonder Boy is probably something like that, although I can't say for sure. We haven't seen much of him on the ground. This can't think of his name. Nash, is that it? Well, there's a couple guys that might be a pretty good example of that. Moreover, though, that archetype has developed to a better archetype that I call, well, that I think is called, excuse me, Sprawl and Brawl, where you've got guys that are heavy-handed, really good stand-up strikers. They're good fighters, but they also have good wrestling or anti-wrestling. They have at least very good defensive wrestling. Then you've got guys like, I would have put Diaz in this camp, that are good strikers, especially like boxers, and they've got a good like defensive grappling game, or at least a good guard. So their takedown games maybe aren't that big a deal because they're really counting on their ability to deliver punishment on their standing, and they're probably expecting that if they're really getting the best of this fight, and if I had to put myself in one of these camps, I'd say that I'm more or less this type of fighter, good striker, and I have a pretty good guard, not a great takedown game by any stretch, and not maybe that dominant on top, but if you get a guy that's a good striker, he can deliver a lot of punishment, incentivize his opponent to take the fight to the ground, and then if he can fight off of his back, then that's a pretty good skill set. And there's more, but it's often these matchups of the archetypes, these archetypical fighting styles. It's the matchup that determines the outcome of the fight more often than any other thing does, and certainly more often than things like hype, trash talk, popularity, charisma, and polarity. By polarity, I mean a figure has a polarizing. He's a polarizing figure if he creates a situation where people really know him and either love him or hate him. And these polarizing figures tend to get a lot of dead money in on them. A lot of, like, dead money is money that's bet on them that should not be bet on them, because the people that really love them tend to bet on them, but the people that really hate them don't necessarily bet against them. So there's this emotional facet that doesn't have any real ground in who's going to win the fight. It doesn't do any good as a predictor of what's going to happen, but it does do us some good when predicting what the money line is going to look like. Whenever there's a deviation between those two things, there is the opportunity to make a value bet, a value wager, a wager that is plus EV in the long run. Realistic analysis also does not put a lot of weight on this assumption of linear hierarchies among fighters. So these are the things that I look for. If we find places where the betting line is likely to put heavy emphasis on things that don't matter, I call them overestimates or overestimators. These superstitious ideas, these gambler's fallacies, these flaky kind of half thought out things, these like the last fight they had, there was this huge anomaly. I cited the when I was doing my video that I predicted RDA over McGregor before RDA broke his foot. that this 13-second knockout from McGregor probably created a lot more hype and a lot more dead money than it should have. Because in reality, there are moments in a fight where it's just kind of that perfect moment where all of your training kind of comes into place and your timing is perfect and you get a little bit lucky. Your opponent drops his guard right when you're ready to go, and you go while he's coming into you, and there's a knockout. Now, if that happens in round three towards the end, it's a three-fight win, and it's a knockout towards the end of round three. But if that moment just accidentally happens in the first 13 seconds of the fight, it's a 13-second knockout. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the fighter is better because he found that exact moment 13 seconds in than if he found it, towards the end of the third round. But what it will do is it will create this fantasism that this guy is knocking people out in 13 seconds. This romantic idea that, man, this guy's a killer. He won in 13 seconds. I would doubt that there's a very big correlation between fighters, and I haven't checked this, but a very big correlation between fighters who have had very, very quick finishes and have gone on to do great things and become like top guys. I'm sure there's some correlation because it's proof of concept. At least we know that person is capable of delivering that perfect shot. But I doubt it's a really, really huge. I think it's overestimated. And any kind of overestimator that comes in will cause more money to be wagered on a fighter than is necessarily warranted. And that's where we're looking to find our edges. The biggest places to find edges in MMA are definitely overvalued favorites, and therefore wagering on the opposite, the value underdogs. I think we can find tremendous edges and really good value bets betting the dogs in a lot of fights. I actually saw a statistic about, I don't know, I'm sure it's still true. In fact, it might be more true. But I was reading something about a year ago, and it showed what would happen if you had wagered $100 on every underdog since they started taking bets on MMA. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was staggering. If you had just bet every single underdog, same number, like just bet one unit, whatever your standard unit is, on every single underdog, taking every single underdog, you would be swimming in money. I mean, that would have been a very plus EV strategy. And I think at least until this last fight, betting every underdog still was a legitimate strategy. And maybe it'll regulate itself. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to comb through the next few fights and see if I can get bets in on some value underdogs before the lines maybe start to renormalize. Maybe people are starting to see, hey, look, I keep betting these favorites and they keep losing, or man, I'm doing really good with underdogs. Maybe I should do that. And we might see a slight shift that could take away from our ability to print money on value underdogs, but maybe not. Maybe not. So the key indicators that we might have an edge in our betting are going to be trash talk, hype, figures that have made a name for themselves even outside of the fight world. Those people are going to bring people into the betting pool that don't belong there, that don't know anything about fighting. They don't know anything about MMA. Maybe they're sports bettors and they find out about this guy that everybody's talking about. They're gambling junkies and they're like, you know what, he's awesome. I'm going to throw $100 on him. They don't pay much attention to the line. They don't listen to advice. They just think, I know this guy's good. Everybody's talking about him like he's awesome. I want to be involved in this. I want to ride the hype train with him, and they'll bet him. So pretty good indicator. If your grandfather or your grandma, even your mother, knows who a fighter is, there's a pretty good chance you can find value betting against them. Again, nonlinear hierarchies, huge key indicators. People don't understand this rock, paper, scissors effect when it comes to fighters. They think that, okay, Ronda versus Miesha Tate. Miesha Tate lost to Ronda twice. Holly Holm beat Ronda. Therefore, Holly Holm must be a massive favorite against Miesha Tate. But that's not always the way it works, right? Because there's not always a linear hierarchy. Sometimes there's non-linear hierarchies. We've already talked about that. Romantic stories. People love these guys that lived in a car for 2 years and were, I don't know, that just have like a really interesting backstory that makes them want the fighter to win. Guys, wanting a thing to happen does not make it likely to happen. It doesn't affect the likelihood that it's going to happen. but it will affect the likelihood that somebody will bet on it because people use emotional reasons to justify their wagering, especially gamblers that are really, that have gambling problems, and also MMA fanboys who know nothing about gambling. So when there's a really great backstory, pay attention. There might be an opportunity for a profitable wager betting against that fighter. Anomalies, things that are unlikely to occur are still supposed to occur some percent of the time. But once an anomaly has occurred, it doesn't always make it more likely to occur in the future. So that's something to look out for. Like when you see this 13-second knockout, no one's going to bet that that's going to happen again, but they'll look at that anomaly and say, you know what, this guy's the real deal because he got what really could have been a fluke shot, right? I mean, it's probably not exactly a fluke, but it's some amount of fluke, right? Some percent fluke. Okay, so overlay comes from dead action. Dead action is generated when when gamblers or sports bettors or MMA fans wager with their hearts, wager with their emotions, rather than betting with their heads, and they don't use analytics. They use emotions, and that's where the overlay comes from. This was the example I gave. Tate loses to Ronda loses to Holm. That does not necessarily mean that Tate is a massive, huge underdog to Holm. But what it will mean, you can pretty much guarantee the line is going to reflect that is exactly the case. Fights are more volatile than people want to believe. So people that are betting sports tend to just bet on the fighter they think is the better fighter without really paying that much attention to the line, or they at least do that more often than they ought to. People especially fights, I think, don't understand. And people that come from other venues where they're used to betting on sports teams, where the favorite usually wins. The favorite almost always wins. In a sports betting situation, you're more likely to take a spread than a money line, right? You're not going to just take some team that's a huge favorite and bet against them because you're getting money odds. Because really the best team, or the team that has the best matchup that's been analyzed and is the favorite, is probably going to win a very high percent of the time. So instead, you're spotted points, right? That doesn't exist in MMA. So people are just used to this, like, okay, the best team usually wins. Almost always the favorite wins. So we should bet on the favorite in the fighting game too. But they don't understand that fights are much more volatile than sports teams. When you've got a sports team fighting against playing against another sports team, there's so much time to reduce variance, and there's so few ways to like, you can't just like in the first round. Well, the first round, listen to me. You can't be playing a football team. You can't have a football team just take off and just win the game in the first quarter, right? It can't happen. Like, there's all this long period of time for the variance to work itself out in such a way the favorite is a lot more likely to win than the favorite of a 3-round fight. I mean, fights are lucky things happen in small doses more likely than they happen over long stretches of time. So because of that, and because any man can be knocked out, right? And because lucky shots happen, and all of these things, fights are just a lot more volatile, and the underdog is rarely as big an underdog as people tend to think. Even if they're sure, even if they could be sure that this fighter is the favorite in this particular matchup, which is not often that easy to do, there's still going to be this general tendency to think that the better fighter that is a favorite in this matchup is going to win like 10 out of 10 against this fighter. We know that's not true. How many rubber matches have we seen? How many times have we seen fighters go in and fight the first time, one fighter wins, they fight the second time as a rematch, the other fighter wins, and it's kind of anybody's guess who's going to win the third fight. Fights are volatile. You don't see that as much in, say, professional basketball, the NBA, right? If Team A in the NBA beats Team B pretty handily, and becomes the favorite, it's pretty likely they're going to win the second game. Now, I know that's not always true, and teams do trade back and forth, but when you have one team that is clearly superior to the other team, they're very, very likely to win the game. But when you've got one fighter who's clearly superior to the underdog, it's not the same thing. It's just more volatile, there's more variance, and that volatility and variance is not reflected in the line the way it ought to be. And that gives us an opportunity to make money betting value underdogs. Good stories, I've said it before, dead action is created by good stories. Money is added to a fight without regard to the facts that actually predict the outcome of the fight based on romanticism, this idea that I really like this guy, so I'm going to bet money on him, right? That's how we, as rational bettors and monetary investors in the fight game, make money. We make money from people making emotional decisions or just bad decisions. So, what that means is underdogs are usually better bets than the favorites because of all the dead action that comes in on the favorites. So, why is it more lucrative to bet fights than other sports? I'm going to tie it up right here. MMA is a very tight-knit community. The people talking about the fights to the masses, the people that people are listening to, are just too close to the fighters. What that means is they're going to have a hard time being objective. And it also means they might have a hard time stating their real opinions. Like, Joe Rogan is a brilliant fight analyst, but you will very rarely hear him say something like, yeah, at 2-1, I think this is a really good pick because, he's going to be at a party later on with that guy. It's one human being he's talking about. It's not a team. It's one human. It's one agent, one person that he is going to probably talk to at some point and definitely see. They're going to run into each other. He's got to be kind of careful about what he says just because he doesn't want to hurt the person's feelings. He doesn't want to feel awkward. And it's just not his job. Point blank, it's not his job to predict fights. Now, the other things are, the sport's new. It's not well understood by bookmakers. It's not well understood by people that are betting, like professional gamblers, don't necessarily understand fighting. So the bookmakers, there's just not that many good bookmakers. There's not that many, really good, unbiased analysts. Well, there was one really good analyst that I think made a lot of really good predictions and broke down fights very well, and then he kind of got sanctioned by the UFC, and now it's not the same. Now he's pulling his punches. He's not really picking the fights. It's not his job anymore. His job now is to hype the fights. Right now, the big money is being bet on other sports besides mixed martial arts, and mixed martial arts fights are mostly being bet on by MMA fanboys, not gamblers that are professional or otherwise. So people that are very big into MMA are not necessarily big in gambling. They don't necessarily bet other sports. People that bet other sports don't necessarily bet MMA. I've got a good friend who's basically a gambling addict. He's a very good winning poker player, but he struggles a lot because he puts too much money on too many sports bets, and he's just recently, this is the first card that I know of that he's even attempted to put money on any of the fights, even though I've given him picks. They're just not interested in MMA. So there's not as much incentive for the bookmakers to get out there and really do their homework, make sure the lines are solid. Because they're going to change. They're going to change a lot more than, say, the betting line that Vegas opens up on some sports bet's going to change. And the fans are not as gambling savvy. So there's not as much crossover. I think that's it could change. It probably will change. But right now, that affords the person who's well-informed and well-educated, it gives them a good edge, an ability to make money or find spots with overlay. Guys, I've been doing this for 2 weeks, and if you type in to search on YouTube MMA fight predictions, man, I pop right up. There's just nobody doing it. The sport's new, it's not well understood. And no one in a position to really make good predictions has any incentive to make good predictions. They have all the incentive in the world to sell the fight and hype the fight, but they have very little, if any, incentive to actually tell you what's what. You'll see people on sports news stations, or you'll tune into some station and you'll see people really discussing football and what's the most likely outcome and where the spread is and where it should be and yada yada. You don't see that in mainstream media as it relates to MMA fighting, and that means that the masses, the general masses, the people that are betting on the fights are just less informed, or they're not informed in correct ways that make them as apt to make good, wise decisions. So if we take advantage of this lack of information by becoming more informed ourselves, then we do have this opportunity. Finally, why take my advice on the subject? Well, I am a pretty much lifetime martial artist. I got involved with karate at 10 and got my black belt there. Went to WTF. Well, no, I went to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu from karate. Didn't make it that far, though. I mean, I was driving, 40 minutes to train under a blue belt, so it just wasn't big then. So then I went to WTF Taekwondo, and I did a little bit of Muay Thai kickboxing in Florida, and got back into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu under Edson Diniz, and then under Saulo Ribeiro in Toledo, and his younger brother Shanji, or Alexander Ribeiro, Alexande. And Chris Blanky, I know these guys. I'm in the know. I'm a fight fan. I've been in it for a long time. I'm training Gracie Jiu-Jitsu today. I'm not under Ribeiro anymore. I moved to Cleveland. I'm training in a Gracie affiliation that's under Pedro Sar, and I see a need here, a need for good fight pick advice, and I plan to try to fill that void. So I'm going to go after it. And I'm not a gambler, but I am a poker player. I don't bet any sports. I don't bet a lot of these fights. I take really good shots when I think there's a lot of value in it. I make money at poker, and I've been semi-pro at the horse races. I played for a summer when I worked part-time, and I played part-time. I made more money doing that than I did, betting the horses than I did at my job, because I was able to look at things like, okay, this is America's favorite color, so that's more likely to create dead money. You just look at these deviations between the bookie-generated win odds and what you can see as the information on the horse racing program, and then all the people that are betting money on red or blue because it's their favorite color, or if the red or blue horse is also the 7 horse. Well, good Lord, if it has an attractive name to boot, then, all kinds of people might bet on that horse, and there's no real logical reason to bet on that horse. They're just betting to have fun. And if you made sure to take advantage of that, you could often find spots where the bookie-generated odds that you sort of agree with based on what you see in the program and know about the racer and the horse, say that the horse is a favorite. Maybe it's coming in at like 5-1. It's a favorite in the race, but if you look up at the board, you see that it's paying 20-1. So that's looking for spots to take advantage of the difference between the money line and what's likely to happen. So I have experience in this area. I understand gambling. I understand fighting, and I've got a really good record. I know it's I haven't, my public record is not that big. I haven't publicly picked all that many fights, but I have done some recently, and I predicted, I think publicly, I did definitely bet Weidman to upset Silva. I put money on Holly Holm to upset Ronda, just because the line was crazy. I wasn't really expecting to win that, but I thought it could happen. And I got it at 12-1. It was insane. So made a lot of money on that. And more recently, I've publicly on this channel and among some of the people that I coach have picked Royce Gracie over Ken Shamrock, kind of as a joke, but not really. I mean, I bet him and I won money, and he was the underdog. I took Tate versus Holm and made a good chunk on that. I publicly announced and told some of you that Diego Sanchez seemed to be the favorite in that matchup to me, and he was the underdog. I bet him. He won. I predicted that RDA would beat McGregor, and while that fight didn't actually happen, I still feel that last night pretty much proved that my prediction was the right prediction, that he at least should not have been the underdog, right? McGregor's not a favorite against RDA, and now I don't think anyone in the world's going to think that he still is. He really had no business even getting that fight, and if you watch my RDA video, you'll see that I said as much. And, you know, I did try to put money in on the Diaz fight at the last minute, and some of you watching know that I told you that you would either want to bet the underdog or pass in that situation. And some of you I talked to later know that I was pretty upset when I wasn't able to place the wager at 4-1. So I'm going to try to I'm really only going to look for really valuable situations. I went over the upcoming fights. Nothing on UFC Fight Night really jumped out. Nothing in the next couple of cards that I saw really jumped out, but I'm going to do some more research. There was one thing that I do want to look into, and I'm just going to give you a quick like preview pick. I actually think the Lyoto Machida fight that's coming up, Dan Henderson, Lyoto Machida, I think that's a value underdog scenario. I don't know that Henderson should be a pretty massive underdog in that fight. So I'm going to do more investigation on that, but that's the only one that jumped out that's coming up that just jumped out at me and said this line is whack. I'm going to look into it a little bit more, but right now I'm tempted to just go ahead and put this wager in while I have what I think is a value underdog because I'm worried that the tides are going to turn and people are going to start betting more underdogs. So yeah, I'm not going to recommend you do that until I actually have some more reason to believe that because I am going to be selective with these fight picks. By the way, guys, if any of you have any questions you want to ask me about my take on a certain fight, feel free to do that. Just realize that if it's something you're asking me that I haven't published, take it with a grain of salt. I will publish the ones that I feel very strongly about, and if I don't feel very strongly about it, you can still feel free to ask me questions, and maybe that will give me incentive to look at the fight and see if there's something I can figure out that maybe the general masses might not have. So until next time, guys, Navonod, wishing you good, quote, luck, end quote.